Hi, and welcome to this part of the CultureLab convening. There are one or two new faces, so I'm just going to quickly repeat the introduction. CultureLab is a gathering of a consortium of international arts consultants to share thinking and debate, and it's hosted by the Harris School of Public Policy at the University of Chicago. Yesterday we had a great discussion about supply and demand issues in the arts, and we intend to publish a white paper later in the year on that. Today is about sharing emerging practice, and right now we're going to have a very pertinent debate about audiences and their experiences. As a field, we're grappling with serious issues surrounding the sanctity of the audience experience. What are the limitations of audience interaction and engagement during arts experiences? Are we undermining the art forms by inviting audience members to tweet? Does art speak for itself, needing no mediation, embellishment, or should we provide audiences with more and more interpretive assistance and allow them to photograph, remix, react in real time? When is technology disruptive? When could we adopt it, perhaps adapt it for our purposes? We've got two great people to stimulate our debate. Martha Lavey, Artistic Director of Steppenwolf Theatre Company, and Alan Brown, Principal of WolfBrown. Martha joined Steppenwolf Ensemble in 1993 and has been its acclaimed artistic director since 1995, leading one of the most renowned theatre companies in the world, internationally respected for its work. Martha, particularly of interest to me, has a doctorate in performance studies from the Northwestern University. Alan Brown's also world-renowned and acclaimed internationally for his groundbreaking research into audience behaviour, their perceptions of the arts, and the value of its impact. When I first heard Alan speak, he joked that he was researching whether Donna Summer was the thread that unites us all.
In conclusion, Alan? Yes, yes.
Still working on it.
He's still working on it. I'm Roger Tomlinson, amongst other things, chairman of the Centre for Performance Research at the University of Wales in the UK, where we focus on the performative. What happens in that interaction between performer and audience when something is created? This debate is about how 21st century technology and the always-on generation impact on that interaction. I just might like to refer to a couple of interesting events recently. In London on the 10th of April at the Royal Festival Hall, tenor soloist James Gilchrist, according to the reports, was overcome while playing the evangelist in the Bach's St. Matthew Passion, and he had to be rushed to hospital. And the interesting thing is the BBC Radio 3 was recording and broadcasting this conference. Now they cleverly whipped out a CD of Robert Tier performance and actually just inserted it in so that they could actually complete the broadcast. I thought that was a kind of imaginative technological leap in itself. But James, arriving in hospital, was horrified to find messages from his friends, including members of the cast, about what had happened because they'd tweeted and the audience had tweeted. And there was quite a bit of coverage about that being disruptive. I loved the comment, and I have not been able to find it, of a Broadway actor, I don't know who it was, I found the quote, said it's fascinating to look out into the Broadway audience from the stage and in certain plays see everyone underlit in blue with their blackberries on the laps. And what are they concentrating? And the UK dramatist Alan Ayckbourn realised when he was an actor that for audiences the intensity of their attention varied with the quality of the drama. And he said that he was always going to write plays which held people's attention. But is there now competition for that attention? Or is this a new opportunity where technology has added to the ability of the audience to respond? I mean, Alan Ayckbourn has done some interesting things. He asks actors to toss a coin as to who will play which role at the start of a play, or throw a dice to choose which version of the play to perform that night, and sometimes to choose which ending of the play to deploy that evening. And there's been quite a bit of discussion about whether new technology could enable those decisions to be actually taken by the audience. So, what's at stake in this debate? Rapid innovation in the use of new technologies, but we cannot run headlong into this new frontier without considering the underlying issues. I'm going to ask Martha to begin with an opening statement, followed by Alan, and then we'll hope to open it up for questions and comments from the floor, and if necessary, I've got some stuff I prepared earlier to cross-examine them further. But Martha,
thank you,
welcome.
Roger. Thank you very much. Yeah, as Alan and I acknowledged just before we began, we feel like this conversation has already begun. It began in the half hour that we spent, reviewing the material, and just the question of where technology sits before, during, after a performance. And to Ben's point, I think that for me the most salient point is to what end the technology. I mean, there is the use of it for marketing to an audience and engaging them previous to the performance. And then, but I'm, as an artistic director and as an actor, my interest is really where does the technology sit in the interpretive process and in the ability for an audience member to be creative around the performance. That's my interest. And I think it's also important to acknowledge that when we say technology, it's that whether it be language, whether it be performance, technology has impacted cultural history and these performance forms, and particularly, the transition from orality to literacy. The techne of the printing press was huge in terms of just what the social and cultural dynamics are, and particularly relative to attention. I mean, I recognize that, the kind of theater that our theater does is very language-based, it's character-driven, it's very narrative. So there's a demand on attention that I think is different from work that tends more towards spectacle, or that is more, if circus is that one end of it, I mean, we're in a place that assumes that there is a kind of attentiveness and that there's a quiet. I guess for me the big issues are, why is it that people come to the theater? And we've touched on this in these myriad conversations here. For me, an essential part of that is the experience of collectivity, with attention trained toward a performance act. And at Steppenwolf, I think, as Linda was acknowledging earlier, the dynamic between the artistic and the communication part of our theater has grown more and more fluid, because if you say the artists are making the work, ultimately what the theater is doing is making a community. I mean, we can say audience, but I think in our case we're hoping that the engagement transcends simply a ticket buyer and becomes a community, and an interpretive community. And I think that's where our work is focused, how to make that engagement more particular, how to make the people who come to the theater more eloquent around the themes and the ideas of our plays, and how to get them to interact with each other. So for me, I'm not unafraid to say, I feel like leading up to the experience of the performance, bring on the techne, whatever has people interested, engaged, informed to the level that they want to be about the experience that they're having, and also after the performance to speculate. There are a lot of different ways, but I think all of our engagements that happen through technology are mirrored, or actually preceded by an offline, a real live engagement with our audience, so that after every performance at our theater 8 times a week, there's a post-show discussion. Not everyone can participate in that, and they're given further opportunities after that. I think where we're looking to go at our theater is to add, and we're in the middle of a web redesign. The thing that we would like to enable is for our audience, the people who receive our work, to then be able to engage creatively with the work. And, a play presents a million opportunities for that. Alternate endings, different character trajectories. In the spirit of fan fiction, it would be fantastic to have people be able to engage and speculate. And then I think the next iteration of that would be, and we look to our future and the potential of revising our space, to give them a platform in the theater, post performance, to be storytellers themselves, and to collect small audiences around that. So the idea of an audience engagement and the idea of our work spurning a next iteration of creativity in our audience members is something very dear to our heart. But for me, I'm not at all uncomfortable with saying, when the performance starts, put down the gadgets. I think that's because there are very few experiences, I think, or there are increasingly fewer experiences in the world and in cultural practice that allow us to be reflective. And I think one of the great strengths of theater, and one of its social purposes, if you will, is that we are watching human behavior. We are engaged. It excites us viscerally, but we don't have to react. And I think providing a space where people are asked to hold their impulse to just react is a very salutary one. And I think in many ways that is why people come to the theater, to be together, to experience something together, and then to be able to reflect on it.
Put down the gadgets.
Whip out the gadgets, Al.
Pick up the gadgets.
Yeah.
Thank you, Martha, for a really wonderful perspective, which I respect enormously. This is not Saturday Night Live, so I'm not going to say a lot of things. But I'd like to have a little fun. Could we turn the lights, get the lights down? I'd like to illustrate something. It's the royal wedding today.
Yeah.
Why do you think we're in Chicago?
I thought we might make a princess. This is really. I won't tell you how I found this site.
Better left unsaid.
Better left. Some things are better left unsaid. So. This is a wonderful site where kids, ostensibly, can go and basically construct their own their own princess, and you can change the figure of the.
Not there.
Oh. That is the side. Oh, there we go.
See what the gadgets get you?
It's going down.
Okay, forget it. Kids can make their own doll, and they can change they can put different hair, different jewelry, different clothing, and they can change the skin color, the shape. And the funny thing was on that site, which I won't show you, is there was, they sell advertising on the site. The San Francisco Symphony had an ad running on the site. How did they know such accurate targeting? They would find me on the doll site. But the whole point of that failed exercise was sort of, this is the next generation of arts consumers who are sort of able to extremely customize their leisure experiences. Kids now can make their own dolls and Build-A-Bear, right? Build-A-Bear workshop at the malls. And it just impresses me that other commercial providers of leisure experiences are empowering youth to really design their own experiences and giving people choices to make increasingly. And increasingly, as they grow up, this impulse will follow them into museums and theaters. And meanwhile, we are asking people to experience a fixed duration work of art in a fixed venue at a fixed time, and we want them to buy it 6 months in advance. And I just see the divergence of consumer expectations getting kind of worse and worse. So what I see from research is people wanting shorter, more intense experiences. By and large, I see more people leaving at intermission, not because they're unhappy, but because they've had their fill. I see people buying tickets at the exit on the aisle so they can get out quickly. You know, and I've often wondered, why don't we charge an egress premium, on tickets? So these are just sort of some of the trends, and I was so provoked by this morning's conversation, and I'm learning a lot. And I'm not a technology expert or a psychologist, but I am fascinated with the relationships that people have with their devices, deep psychological relationships. Perhaps dysfunctionally codependent, sometimes, and at other times incredibly helpful, fruitful. People get information. The phone can help serve as a filter to guide them to experiences or places they will enjoy, allow them to interact with people once they're there. And I think we have to really do a lot of research as a field, and all of you can do this. You can sit down and interview young people about the relationship they have with their mobile devices, and ask them how they use it and how they'd like to use it. And if you offered this, would they use it? We can do that. And really try to crack this nut of what is it. So I guess what disturbs me the most about the conversation here is talking about young people as if they were developmentally disabled. Because they prefer to co-process stimuli. And I think we get to a slippery slope of value judgments about what is meaningful to people. And I've learned the hard way. I remember doing an interview once, knocking on doors in low-income neighborhoods and interviewing people about their creative activities. And going into this woman's house, she was a Latin woman, and at the end of it, she was so thoughtful and translated through her daughter. And at the end of the interview, it's one of my favorite questions, saying, of all the art and decorations in your home, which one is most meaningful to you and why? And she thought, and she said, it's the painting over my dining room table. I said, I was sitting in the living room, the dining room, so I said, well, may I look? She said, sure. And so I got up and walked around, and here, hanging over her dining room table, was a horribly faded poster graphic in a cheap plastic frame of an impressionist painting. Barely recognizable. And she told me how much meaning that experience brought her, and how when she was down, she would sit in front of it and it would bring her beauty and hope. And I thought to myself, who am I to judge what is meaningful to people? So I'm hypersensitive to the whole business of making value judgments about what kinds of experiences people find meaningful. Because I'm afraid if we don't allow people to have arts experiences on their terms, or at least partially on their terms, that we may lose a generation of people who otherwise might engage in the arts. So that's my.
Okay. I'm actually going to come back to you, Alan. And there's a kind of but there. You've done a substantial amount of research about the intrinsic impacts that audience members experience at theatre programs. And you said that being fully captivated, achieving a mental state of flow at live arts programs is the root of all those impacts. But I suppose my question is, by your own account, how can people benefit from theatre experience as if they're not paying full attention?
I just love it when you rub my nose in my own doo-doo.
Sorry.
No, that's great question. I think something is lost when attention is compromised. I don't know what, I don't know how much. I know I go to the opera, I toggle between the super titles and the stage. It doesn't bother me. I'm very empowered. I can decide not to look. But I think there's a spectrum. I think different art forms, different interpretive aids are more appropriate for different art forms than other. And I think, of course, we lose something. On the other hand, I think maybe we need more plays that only require half attention. So that...
I think that's fine. It's there are a lot of other traditions in which that's so. I mean, we're talking about a kind of Western historically late development, the way that we go to the theater. But there are a lot of, theater traditions. Let's say there are Indian traditions. Your expectation is that you're going to kind of come in and out and have something to eat But that's what I'm saying for our theater, which is text-based and is written as a kind of closed narrative, that there's an attention that requires. I think.
Is it a young person's thing? And I don't know what age that is defining young as, but you at rock and pop concerts these days, it's pretty much generally accepted and assumed, even encouraged, that everyone is going to be texting, tweeting, photographing, streaming live video, sending stuff to their Facebook friends. There's even a website in Europe when there's a major arena event that if enough people upload simultaneously, they will actually do a kind of live transmission from the website, photographed by 100 different people in the auditorium. And we're used to this kind of processing of those kind of cultural experiences in a different way. Why should theatre be any different, perhaps for that young audience?
Because those are two different events. I mean, I think the important thing in conversations like this is to be discerning and subtle in how we're defining whatever it is. A performance experience that is like that. I mean, part of that is festival. It's bacchanal. It is the experience of each other, and it's the generation of that kind of collective excitement around something, and it's loud. Just as I agree with you, Alan, about young audiences and seeing them as kind of developmentally deficient, I also think we have to be very careful about not regarding the youth as some monolith. I mean, or their engagement with the world as monolithic. We've done a lot of research with our young audiences, millennial audiences, to find out what they seek. There is no expressed interest in having this kind of intervention of technology into their experience. In fact, I work with a young woman who veritably quivers when her phone is not at the other end of her hand, right? But she's very theater savvy. She has absolutely no interest in our theater or herself going into the theater where she's asked to interact with the theater through that technology. I also think, if we're talking the curation of experience, okay, great, excellent. I do think that there is real good in asking people to experience the other point of view. I mean, isn't that what theater is? Is that part of it is, this is not my life, but I am going to compel my empathy to witnessing this behavior and reflecting on it. So the idea that, we just curate out what we don't like, or isn't comfortable or familiar, I'm uncomfortable with that.
Are we getting to a point where we need to signal that a performance is one where there will be no devices, and another performance where there will be devices?
Are we getting to that point? I certainly think a theater can make that choice.
Okay. I'm going to open up to the floor for either questions that you can direct or reactions, please. So.
I guess what I think is curious is, in a way, the distinction between we have this art that's on stage that is somehow complete, and that then there's this technology which is in addition to. It seems to me just a fundamentally different art form if you're creating something that you're interacting with in a different way. And even temporally, when you said that you're using technology leading up to the performance to stream the videos online and so forth and prepare for the audience, that's part of the artwork.
Right.
I don't really see how you can make the distinction.
Well, it's part of the art.
In the end, then, a question of what kind of art should we produce, and I don't think there can be any answer. So there should be companies that do multimedia things, and that's what it is. That's if you're using smartphones or whatnot while you're watching the opera, while you're getting a beat in your ear, that's art, and that's great. But it's something different than just watching the opera, and I don't see really how you can separate those.
Okay.
Hi, as a mother of an 18-year-old, I'm very sensitive to the use of technology in young people's lives. But what I think the issue might be is, I think that generation, they're really sensitive if it's not pure or authentic in experience. So if the technology is applied in a way that seems false or trying too hard, that's what's going to turn them off. Maybe even more so than just letting them make it or not making them, but encourage them to just sit still for an hour and a half. So I think that's why the whole retro thing is so hip with 18-year-olds today. It's like, because it represents a purity, a simplicity, and authenticity, and sometimes modern marketing or modern efforts to market can kind of refuse that purity. So I just think technology might have to be used in a way that makes the experience pure and authentic, not false.
It may sound high-flown, but Peter Brook in Empty Space actually talks about holy theatre, which is something talked about by Grotowski, Artaud, and so on. And Peter Brook's famous statement, which is fascinating, so it's fairly short. It is hard to understand the true notion of spectator, there and not there, ignored and yet needed. The actor's work is never for an audience, yet always is for one. The onlooker is a partner who must be forgotten and still constantly kept in mind. Kept in mind. Gesture is statement, expression, communication, a private manifestation of loneliness. It is always what Artaud calls a signal through the flames. Have to wonder whether the technology is in those flames. Yet this implies a sharing of experience once contact is made. And the interesting question that a lot of performers are asking themselves is, has the nature of that contact and its outcome changed if we allow devices to come between us and those performative moments? Ron?
Yeah, I just wanted to throw this idea out there. If you get rid of the idea of technology, like a phone or something, in your hand for a second, and I replace it with a script, so that I'm actually reading along with the script as I'm watching the show and seeing the blocking notes or something like that. Does that change anyone's opinion about this added layer of performance?
Can I just comment on exactly that? I used to work in orchestras and printed programs, and used to get a number of complaints if the print was too small. Now, I was only in my 20s when I was doing that, so I thought, what's the problem? I have more empathy now. But also complaints if we tried to increase the theatricality of the concert experience by reducing the lighting in the hall. I've got loads of complaints because people couldn't read the program notes. So, you know, they're looking for that accompaniment to their oral experience, It may be a bit better with handheld devices because you wouldn't need to have the house lights up.
Well, and I know it's been, all of us have been in a musical that wasn't that great, so you're looking to see when Act 1's going to be over.
Reading, counting the songs, right?
Yeah.
At the back there.
I think we're leaving out another sort of element that's really important. We've talked a lot about enhancing your experience, this idea of a digital program before or after, or giving you more information throughout. We talked a lot about sending out things, but a lot of what this technology is for is sharing your story, your online identity. And I was here. I just went to a performance where I just wanted my picture with the stage behind me, and then I was giving out cool parts of the script that really made me think. And it was telling my story of I went to this theater and it changed me, and I almost got kicked out for taking that one picture. They were like, no photography. And I was like, the show's not on. I just want to show that I came here. And there wasn't an intermission. It was just like shunned. Like, you were never here. And I think there's a big part of, I work with adolescents where we're using technology to share your biography and to engage with artworks and engage with the art world in a new, as part of you as an individual, as an adolescent. And if I'm sending people out and they can't take a simple photograph that they went to a theater or they went to a museum, if it's not embraced, or there's even a way to encourage that. I don't know.
Nick?
I've been sitting here thinking a bit about history, actually, and I'm trying to throw my mind way back. And I know I don't know Greek classical history well enough to be sure of all of this. So I actually won't give the Greek example first. I'll try something I'm more sure of. Once upon a time, people actually made real dolls. They didn't make virtual dolls with a limited set of options for each part. They made real dolls out of real material. So it strikes me that, in a certain sense, we have to stop thinking of fetishizing the technology as something new. We've always made things. That's what people do. Second, now I will, so that's one history lesson. The other history lesson is technology has always disrupted art in one way or another throughout history. How did Homer feel about theater? Were people who recited poetic histories thrown out of work because theater, they started creating theatrical versions of histories? Before people learned how to read and before there was printing, they learned Bible stories from the theater. What happened to the theater artists who were displaced when people learned to read? I mean, there's this incredibly complex churning through history, it strikes me as. And actually, I think both of you sort of said it in different ways, and it does relate to, Ben seems to be absent now, but his spirit lives in the room, I'm sure. It does relate to what Ben was saying.
Thanks for busting him.
The technologies can be useful when they enrich and deepen and make the experience more meaningful. When they interfere with the meaning of the experience, they're not useful, and my guess is that probably even your audience will, choose not to use them if it's not enriching the experience.
Devin?
I think the discussion around technology in the classroom parallels this one as well. So even in a space like this, if this were a classroom, many people would have their laptops open. If the discussion is engaging, maybe they're taking notes, maybe they're playing on the internet, reading their email. And I think there's that same fear in the theater that if we start letting audience members tweet during the performance, they'll sort of jump to their email. They'll jump to sort of using technology not to augment the experience, but to tune out the experience entirely. And I think, at least from what I've seen in the classroom experience, when the lecture topic and when the lecturer is engaging enough, I have no temptation to check my email if I'm on my laptop. If it's not, yeah, it's pretty easy to kind of tune out and say, I'm gonna check my email, this isn't interesting to me. But people do that in their mind naturally, even without the technology. If I'm watching a piece of theater and I'm not engaged by it, I'm gonna start daydreaming. And that's quite similar to me checking my email.
That's the Eightborn argument that, you know, the role of the theatre is to make sure it holds your attention.
Sorry, isn't the problem there though that if that disturbs somebody else who is completely engaged?
Absolutely, and you know, I think and then we start talking about how we need to kind of segment out those people so that they're not distracted.
Nick?
I think, obviously, when thinking about a theatrical performance and event, the shared experience is important, but I think we also need to not lose sight of the fact that each person that comes to a performance comes with a different level of knowledge, educational experience, life experience, and is bringing to their interpretation of the work a different way of looking at things. And I think what we need to keep in mind is what this technology is facilitating is helping people to engage better with the performance. Tim referred to programs. Printed programs are a technology of engagement because it gives a person a context, some information about what they're seeing. And so what the digital technology is doing is just expanding the possibilities of helping people to engage to the optimum that they want to, because you can't force people to engage. And that's what we should, I think, keep in mind as being the usefulness of technology. And I completely take Martha's point that there are going to be some performances where the theatre company just says, no gadgets, we don't want you to be doing anything else during the performance. If you don't like it, you've got the option of leaving, but don't use your gadget.
And then you get into issues around enforcement, which are really interesting. Enforcement. It's like, what are you going to do? Are you going to have ushers running down the aisle grabbing phones from people?
You know what? They don't need to. They're fellow audience members.
Yeah, there's collective enforcement.
Go to Germany where they basically put
they block it.
Totally block all mobile phone signals inside the auditorium.
Yes, I think one thing that we haven't talked about is that this is really going to hasten the end of the tyranny of professional reviewers. Because now, I mean, I don't know, this is telling my age, but I remember there used to be this theater reviewer for New York magazine, John Simon. You knew, before you even read his review, whether he was going to pan or love a play, and he had tremendous influence over it. But now, anybody could be a reviewer. Anybody could put their thoughts about what the play is, and people are not then forced to read stuff that, quite honestly, a lot of people don't even believe that there's much integrity left in the professional reviewing business, because they're writing whatever they write, the blurbs that are picked for the advertisements and so forth are totally out of context to make it seem like they love the thing, even though the review may have been in a total can.
But you know, the way that this encroaches on the domain of the professional critic is sort of the first wave, because I think behind that is the question of the professional artist. I mean, part of what we're talking about, or sort of the undercurrent of this, and it's participatory in the whole do-it-yourself pro-am culture, right? To your point about text, when you know, this is the big postmodern argument about text, right? When is there anything that has the kind of integrity of calling it the artwork, or does it begin with an interpretive stream that precedes the experience and succeeds it? What are the demarcations of it? And then, of course, what it does then also is relativize who's got. I mean, part of what you could say potentially is underlying this argument is an attempt to preserve the integrity of the artistic identity, to say this person is the one who's got expertise in doing this, so you have to watch that person, as opposed to what is your in receipt of that. Again, I'm not unafraid of enjoying virtuosity. I mean, I like to see people who are good at stuff, you know, and I do think that there are different levels of that. But I also think, some of the learning that we're taking away at Steppenwolf is in conversation with Connie Yowell, who's the director of education at the MacArthur Foundation. And the work that she's been doing, which is education-based, but is with the preteens, et cetera. And what she's looking at is gaming as the model for learning. That MacArthur sort of took its money out of the schools, saying, boy, we're just, it's a sinkhole. How are young people actually learning? And the model of gaming, where a series of challenges educates the gamer into proficiency, and then all of the communities that build up around that. I mean, we're very interested in that for our audience because, as Linda describes, these are people who consider themselves critical thinkers and lifelong learners. So we feel like the more that we can engage them in that activity, and we're finding more and more ways to do that. But again, I guess what I'm saying is I see those things happening in response to performance rather than in the middle of it.
Back row.
I'm wondering if a redefinition of terms needs to...
Could you shout up, please?
I'm wondering if a redefinition of terms needs to be in order, because I'm wondering if this idea of making your own experience is in part developed by technology that once grouped us all together such that we could choose any color we wanted as long as it was black. And I guess I'm wondering if because of that we now interpret this idea of interactiveness and of participation with bringing in technology as a way of moderating that and joining the conversation. So I'm wondering if we have this different idea of experience. I want to piggyback off the doll history lesson. I think there may be something in that.
Yeah, I had a question when we were in the small group sessions, and particularly for Ms. Lavey, who's the artistic director of the Steppenwolf. And it seems like, is it important that the audience at the end of the performance understands what you were trying to convey in the director and the writer? Because, it's particularly for the Steppenwolf that has a thematic season, and it's importance that these plays, to some extent, are related to each other. Is it important that at the end the audience gets that what was the purpose or is it open, and if technology could somehow enhance or increase the possibilities of the audience to understand what the play was trying to convey? And by you at the end of very, very small people stay after for the Q&A or even go to the website. It's a very small percentage. So the biggest percentage is people that are watching the play, and that's what people get out of it. And what is there, looking at technology, is there a way that technology can be used as a way to ensure that the message or what we were trying to convey with the play gets to the audience?
Well, we don't have a message or an interpretation. Do you know what I'm saying? I mean, we're interested in starting a conversation. I mean, we certainly don't feel like we're in charge of meaning.
And that is, in one sense, one of the fundamental arguments, because many, many artists believe that there is absolutely no need to prepare the audience, because it is what happens between the performer and the audience in which anything is created, and it's, in a sense, it is that moment between the two.
But that's such a terrible thing to say, because, right, Roger, have you ever had someone say that in relative to an experience in which you don't know the vocabulary? I mean, it's just like a snobby thing to say.
I got in an argument with another artistic director. This one, an orchestra conductor who did a wonderful program at a conference the night before. It was the music of Shakespeare. It was 3 world premieres of Webern and the 3rd act of Faust on the same program, and there was nothing in the printed program or spoken from the stage at all. And the next day at the conference I said, "Maestro, could you give us a little insight into the program last night?" And he looked at me and he said, "Why do you ask?" And I said, because when you have a thematic program, I think it creates a conceptual contract with the audience, and if they don't have some understanding of how or why, some moment of insight, that you've kind of broken the contract, and that devolved into a shouting match about, he yelled at me, "What could I possibly add to Beethoven's Fifth?" And I yelled
Right.
back probably a lot.
Yeah.
But I learned through that experience that there are two valid positions. One is that everything you can hope to get from a work of art is attainable through the act of listening or observing. And the other school of thought is that you can open up art by adding layers of interpretation. And I think they're both valid viewpoints, and in different situations work.
Okay. Last words. Okay, go on, Peter.
Well, just to pick up right there, I mean, the question is who's doing the interpreting? Is it a monolithic interpretation that comes from the theater or orchestra to the audience? No. Martha, you're saying clearly that's not the point. So the question becomes, are these technologies modes of reflection or captivation, to use the word in your model of arts engagement? Maybe the common denominator here is that what's changed historically, it makes lessons of look historically at this, is what captivation and reflection look like. May be different. We may be applying our old fogey sort of view of that and saying that that's not what's going on. It's possible that those young people with their cell phones trying to Twitter and text each other about this performance are using those as tools for reflection and for captivation.
Can we just say one last one? It's very interesting.
No.
Yeah, may I have to say,
No.
I think all these issues are heightened because there is such a rapid change in technology and the location of communities are changing so quickly. There should be a little bit of faith in humanity and our general ability to recognize quality and to care for it. Right? I don't know if you're disagreeing.
No, I'm agreeing. That was a joke.
Sure. The national reviewers that are just a pretty good big media outlets might be dying because there's a million bloggers out there, but eventually a few of those bloggers are going to demand greater attention because they write quality work.
Yeah.
All want quality. The nature of the theater, the nature of music, all these things, orchestras are going to have to shift their models, but if people still want quality music, they will find it. It's just going to look different. All of this seems heightened, it's changing so quickly. I have no doubt that we'll still want a quality artistic product.
I'm going to want to wind up very soon, but I've had a couple of hands up, so I'm going to go to Duncan first.
Right. So I think Peter's on to something. It isn't just about supplementing the information that's coming from the stage with a written thing or whatever's coming with it. It's about giving audiences the opportunity during or shortly thereafter that experience to respond to it, to roll it over in their mind, to talk about it with other people in a way that they gain meaning from it. Because if they're just sitting there, they don't get as much meaning from it, and that's what your work and Jennifer's work prove. If you give people that opportunity to talk about it, to share it, to jostle with each other, what's that character trying to do, the experience becomes exponentially more powerful to them. They get more.
I guess I'm very old school, and I have a whole nother different perspective on all of this. When I was raising my children, we would go into the theater. I said, you don't go late. And you don't go late because you don't want to disrespect the artist. And so that's the perspective that they have. So they go to the theater, we're fully engaged, and then after the show, on the way home or whenever, we have conversations about what we saw and what we experienced. Now, we go to concerts together too. That's a whole nother experience. And they're tweeting and they're texting and they're doing all of that during a concert. So I don't really, I guess what I'm saying is that the kids, they'll do what my kids got it. That's what I want to say. My kids got it. So they're not so hooked on the technology that they're going to miss out on the experience.
Do you want a last word, Martha?
You sound like a good mother.
That's a great last word. Alan?
I'm taken on the impossible task of engaging with the brilliant
No,
Martha.
Alan, no, silly.
Absolutely in awe of your artistry and your commitment to your art.
That's very kind. Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us. Thank you.